This photo captured 39-year-old Robert Overacker mid-stunt at Niagara Falls on October 1st, 1995. Riding a jet ski straight toward the brink, he hoped to draw attention to the issue of homelessness. But within minutes, that desperate gesture would become his last. At the most critical moment of his jump, Robert's rocket-propelled parachute failed to open. As a result, he plunged a staggering 57 meters into the raging water below, only to be found dead the following day. And sadly, this was neither the first nor the last time someone would attempt the unthinkable at the world's most famous waterfall, which has been taking lives and leaving countless injured for nearly 2 centuries. But fair warning, as always, viewer discretion is advised. On a warm Father's Day weekend in June 2011, 4 teenagers climbed into a small motorboat for what was supposed to be a carefree ride, hoping to enjoy the views of Niagara Falls as close as possible. However, instead of choosing the safer Welland River, a nearby tributary known for calm waters, they ventured straight into the Niagara River itself, where swimming and boating have been strictly prohibited since the early 1900s. Yet at first nothing seemed wrong. The sun was shining, the currents looked deceptively calm, and the distant roar of the falls felt more like background noise than a looming threat. But near the International Control Dam, something went horribly wrong. The motor suddenly failed. As a result, the boat stopped responding to the tiller, spun broadside, and began drifting downstream. Within minutes, the current caught their powerless vessel and dragged it toward the brink, straight toward the 57-meter drop of Horseshoe Falls, the largest of Niagara's 3 waterfalls. Panic set in as the teenagers realized what was happening. They screamed, waved frantically, and tried paddling with their hands, anything to fight the pull. But the river above Niagara moves at nearly 40 kilometers per hour. And in the blink of an eye, their boat struck a cluster of rocks barely 300 meters from the edge, where it miraculously lodged in place. Still, the water around them roared violently, threatening to tip them back into the current at any second. Calls for help went out immediately. New York State Park Police launched a desperate rescue, dispatching a patrol boat into the upper river to reach the grounded teens. Lieutenant Patrick Moriarty and Officer Kevin Kramer fought through white water and blinding mist until they finally reached the stranded vessel. Against all odds, they managed to throw lines, haul each teenager aboard, and bring them back to safety. Miraculously, not one of them was injured. But then, everything went wrong again. As the officers tried to retrieve the abandoned teenagers' boat, their own vessel struck submerged rocks and lost power. The same brutal currents that had nearly killed the teens now dragged the police boat toward the brink, leaving Moriarty and Kramer stranded, helpless in the shallows, just a few hundred meters from the Horseshoe Falls edge. Emergency crews scrambled to coordinate a second rescue as the situation grew more dire by the minute. A Canadian helicopter was called in, hovering low over the raging river in near zero visibility. One by one, rescuers lowered a harness, lifting both officers off the deck of the disabled boat and into safety. Only after the officers were safe did crews face the next challenge, removing the 3,700-kilogram police vessel, still perched perilously close to the brink. At sunrise, the U.S. Army National Guard deployed a massive CH-47 Chinook helicopter for a daring salvage mission. Staff Sergeant James Lentz dangled on a rope beneath the chopper, repeatedly attempting to hook the grounded boat while fighting mist, wind shear, and the roar of the falls. After 45 agonizing minutes, he finally secured the line, and the helicopter lifted the stranded vessel from the river like a dangling toy, depositing it safely on nearby Goat Island. This truly extraordinary rescue instantly made headlines around the world. Yet despite saving 4 teenagers and surviving their own near-death ordeal, Moriarty and Kramer received little more than quiet thanks and a handshake. And if anyone doubted how lethal those currents can be, history had already provided a chilling reminder. Back in 1960, a small boat capsized in nearly the same spot. The man at the helm, Jim Honeycutt, was killed instantly as the vessel was swept toward the Horseshoe Falls. And although 7-year-old Roger Woodward miraculously survived, to this day, experts still consider his survival a once-in-a-lifetime fluke. Yet time and again, tourists ignore the warnings, convinced they'll be the lucky ones as well. And sometimes it isn't thrill seekers at all, but ordinary people chasing the perfect photo. On August 14, 2011, less than a month after the last near disaster, a 20-year-old Japanese exchange student, Ayano Tokumasu, visited Niagara Falls with a friend. The two were sightseeing on the Canadian side at Table Rock, one of the most popular viewing points above Horseshoe Falls. The spot is lined with sturdy metal railings and stone pillars, placed specifically to keep visitors safe from the rushing water just meters away. But like so many before her, Ayano decided to climb past them. As her friend prepared to take her picture, Ayano carefully swung one leg over the railing and straddled one of the stone pillars, holding a small umbrella in her hand. Witnesses later said she seemed happy, smiling, trying to get a shot without other tourists in the background. But the stones were slick with mist, and the wind near the brink of the falls is unpredictable. In a split second, Ayano lost her balance. Horrified onlookers screamed as she slipped backward, landing in the raging upper Niagara River just a few meters from the brink. The current was immediate and merciless. She vanished over the 57-meter drop before anyone could react. Rescue crews on both the Canadian and U.S. sides were mobilized instantly. Boats and helicopters searched the churning plunge pool below Horseshoe Falls, while police reviewed surveillance footage to confirm what had happened. For 4 days, divers and patrols scoured the river. In a grim twist, searchers even recovered an unrelated male body during the effort. But Ayano herself was not found until August 18th, when staff at the Cave of the Winds attraction on the American side discovered her remains downstream. Ultimately, her death was attributed to drowning, with the brutal drop causing fatal injuries long before any rescue could have been possible. Unfortunately, Ayano's case was far from the last. In the years since, Niagara has continued to draw people not just for its beauty, but even for darker reasons. And in 2023, the same observation points that once hosted family vacations became the scene of something even more disturbing. The Prospect Point Observation Tower is one of the most photographed spots on the American side of Niagara Falls. Rising 86 meters above the gorge, it juts out over the river to give visitors a panoramic view of all three waterfalls at once: American Falls, Bridal Veil Falls, and Horseshoe Falls in the distance. Families flock there for sunset photos, couples pose in the mist, and nearly 8 million tourists each year lean over its sturdy railings to take in the view of the roaring water below. But in June 2023, visitors at that very tower witnessed something they would never forget. On the morning of June 18th, a 19-year-old teenager standing quietly at the edge of the deck suddenly climbed over the railing. At first, some bystanders assumed he was posing for a dramatic photo, like so many tourists before him. But seconds later, he jumped. Screams erupted across the platform as his body plummeted nearly 86 meters into the gorge below. Rescue boats and park rangers rushed to the base of the American Falls, but there was nothing they could do, since the teenager's death was immediate. Before staff and visitors could even process the tragedy, less than a week later, on June 24th, it happened again. A different individual, this time an adult, climbed over that very same railing and leapt into the gorge. 2 intentional jumps in the span of a single week at the exact same spot left park officials stunned and traumatized those who had witnessed them. Authorities withheld the victims' identities out of respect for their families, but what followed was unprecedented. Within days, New York State Parks installed additional barriers that pushed visitors nearly 1.5 meters back from the edge of the deck, the first major physical change to the tower in its decades-long history. More rangers were stationed on patrol, specially trained to spot signs of someone in distress. Crisis hotline phones were placed in prominent positions, connecting directly to mental health support lines. But unfortunately, even stronger barriers and more patrols were no guarantee of safety, because the very next year, in 2024, another shocking tragedy unfolded just a few hundred meters away, only this time, not a lone jumper, but an entire family. 33-year-old Keontae Means was known to friends as compassionate, full of life, and dedicated to helping others. A domestic violence counselor with a master's degree in social work, she spent her days advocating for victims and raising her 2 children, 9-year-old Roman and 5-month-old Mecca. However, in the weeks leading up to October 2024, those closest to her began to notice troubling signs. Having recently given birth, Keontae was reportedly battling severe postpartum depression. She was also deeply affected by a painful split from her children's father, something Keontae frequently hinted at in social media posts that grew increasingly cryptic and heartbreaking. In one, she wrote, "You have to hold on to the ones you love. You never know when you might lose them." At the time, friends were concerned, but none realized these quiet cries for help were building towards something far more tragic. On the night of October 28, 2024, Keontae took her children and drove to Luna Island, a narrow strip of land wedged between the American Falls and Bridal Veil Falls. accessible only by footbridges from Goat Island. Upon arriving around 9 p.m., she walked toward the railing, holding baby Mecca in her arms and Roman by the hand. Waiting until most of the tourists had left, Chianti made a truly horrific and fateful decision. She lifted her children over the barrier and climbed over herself. Witnesses screamed and rushed to call 911. But by the time police and park rangers arrived, the family had already vanished into the darkness below, swallowed instantly by the 57-meter plunge into the raging lower Niagara River. Emergency crews launched one of the most intense search operations in recent park history. Helicopters hovered over the gorge, their spotlights cutting through the mist. Boats and rescue swimmers scoured the rapids below the falls, while drones mapped the turbulent current downstream toward Lake Ontario. However, despite days of searching, no trace of Chianti or her children was ever found. The case left even veteran responders shaken, with one of them saying, "In all my years here, I've never seen anything like this." Because unlike the Daredevil stunts or tragic accidents that long have dotted Niagara's history, this was different. A deliberate act involving not one life, but three, in the most horrific way imaginable. In stark contrast to Chianti and her children's tragic fate, the final case we'll cover today involves a man so obsessed with fame that he chose one of the most extreme ways to challenge the deadly waterfall, attempting it not once, but twice. On October 20th, 2003, early morning mist clung to the cliffs of Horseshoe Falls as tourists wandered the lookout at Table Rock on the Canadian side of Niagara. Among them stood a lone man, quiet and unassuming, dressed in nothing more than jeans and a sweatshirt. Moments before he climbed over the railing, a bystander asked him a simple question: "Are you going to jump?" The man turned, calm and almost casual, and replied, "Yes, ma'am, I think I am." Seconds later, he let go of the rail. The raging Niagara River pulled him toward the brink, just 6 meters from the edge. Horrified witnesses watched as he floated briefly on his back, then disappeared over the 57-meter drop of Horseshoe Falls. Normally, a fall like that is instantly fatal. The water at the base churns with such force it can hold victims underwater for minutes, shattering bones and tearing bodies apart. Yet against every conceivable odd, the man resurfaced alive. Battered and gasping, he clung to a rock outcrop at the base of the falls until rescuers reached him. Doctors at Greater Niagara General Hospital were stunned to find that he had suffered nothing more than broken ribs and severe bruising. And in that moment, the world learned his name, Kirk Jones, a 40-year-old auto parts salesman from Michigan who had just become the first known person to survive an unprotected plunge over Niagara Falls. Park officials, however, were far less impressed. Ultimately, Jones was fined $3,000, banned from Canada for life, and widely condemned for endangering not only himself but also the rescuers who had risked their lives to save him. But for Kirk Jones, none of that mattered, because overnight, he became an unlikely celebrity. He appeared on talk shows, booked sideshow appearances, and was briefly hailed as a living legend in Daredevil circles. Still, unfortunately for Jones, fame proved fleeting. Within months, the attention faded, and as the years passed, Kirk's life quietly spiraled into obscurity. Yet deep down, he couldn't let it go. And nearly 14 years later, desperate to reclaim the spotlight, he returned to Niagara with a stunt even more bizarre and even more dangerous than the one that had made him famous. On April 19, 2017, midday crowds gathered along the American side of Niagara Falls. The spring air was cold and damp, and the roar of Horseshoe Falls drowned out most conversations. But then, something unusual caught the eyes of several tourists standing near the overlook. A massive, transparent plastic ball, about 3 meters wide, was spinning wildly in the rapids just above the brink. Its zippered hatch was open, flapping in the current, and inside, there was no one. Moments later, the empty ball surged over the edge and vanished into the mist. Authorities were baffled. Who had been inside? And why? Yet it didn't take long to find out. Within hours, investigators traced the stunt to a familiar name, Kirk Jones. The same man who had survived the unthinkable with no protection at all back in 2003. But this time, he had brought something else with him. His 2-meter-long pet boa constrictor, Misty. The plan was bizarre. Jones had reportedly told friends he intended to set a new record, the first man to survive Niagara Falls inside a giant inflatable ball with a snake. He even launched a website titled Believe in the Impossible. Kirk Jones and Misty Conquer Niagara. But whatever preparation he had done wasn't enough. Sometime that morning, Jones entered the river upstream and climbed into the inflatable sphere. At some point, whether from the violent rapids, a faulty zipper, or sheer panic, the hatch opened. Later, authorities concluded he had either been ejected from the ball or tried to escape when things went wrong, only to be swept into the deadly current. While that same ball was spotted empty in the water just moments before it went over the falls, Jones himself wasn't seen again for weeks. And on June 2, 2017, nearly 20 kilometers downriver at the mouth of Lake Ontario, the U.S. Coast Guard finally recovered his lifeless body from the water. The boa constrictor Misty, in turn, was never found. Tragically, unlike Kirk Jones's miraculous survival in 2003, there was no second miracle, and no chance to reclaim the fleeting fame he had once chased. Niagara Falls isn't just one of the world's most breathtaking natural wonders, it's also one of its deadliest. Over the past 2 centuries, more than 5,000 people have lost their lives here through stunts, accidents, or desperate final acts, with the first recorded fatality dating back to the 1850s. Today, both Canada and the United States enforce strict patrols and heavy fines, up to $10,000 in Canada and $25,000 in the US, for anyone caught in restricted waters. Swimming in the upper Niagara River is strictly banned. Barriers line every outlook, and Daredevil stunts are treated as serious as criminal offenses. Yet despite every warning sign, every fence, and every tragic headline, people continue to climb, to jump, and to fall. And perhaps, tragically, that's exactly what draws millions of tourists here every year. Beauty and danger, forever entwined. What do you think? And would you dare stand at the edge of those roaring waters, knowing how many never came back? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more shocking real-life stories that reveal the hidden, dangerous side even of the world's most popular landmarks.